If you're a B2B business, a B2B tech company, or a B2B marketer, you're in the right place. Coming to you from Studio 26, this is the Interesting B2B Marketers Podcast, bringing you interesting contemporary takes, industry tips, guest interviews, and true stories from B2B marketers in the trenches. Now, here's your host, Steve Goldhaber.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Studio 26. Today, I am joined by Bob Buday. He's the author of Competing on Thought Leadership. So great to have you on the show. Welcome, Bob.
Thank you. Great to be here, Steve.
All right, cool. So before we get into stories, just give us like the 60-second background about who you are and what have you been up to?
Let's see, who am I? I'm 67 years old, and I've been in thought leadership for 36 years, meaning I started in thought leadership, the profession, even before there was this term thought leadership to designate people who are in the profession. So Some people have been in it longer than me. Not many who I know, but some have.
That just screams experience to me. Experience is good. All right, so we're going to start like we always do with some stories. And the first one you're going to share with us is relating to conference marketing. And I'm excited to hear the story because something very bizarre happened in the middle of this conference that led to something good happening. So take it away. Share the story.
Sure. So last November, we ran a 3-day conference in November of 2022. It's our 6th conference called Profiting from Thought Leadership. We had about 55 people in the room and another 55 or so watching virtually. So in the room on day 2, there was a power outage in this hotel in Southern California, in Dana Point, California. The hotel was out of power for about an hour and a half. And we thought the attendees were going to complain royally to us, looking at this hotel, power outage, how come they don't have backup power, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It actually turned out we didn't get one complaint. In fact, a number of the conference attendees said, that was great. I got to spend another hour and a half with my peers that I wouldn't have had there not been a power outage. So what that said to me, this tribe of people in thought leadership, it's a terrific tribe of people who are passionate about it and just as passionate about meeting others who are in similar roles across sectors. And the people in that room at the conference came from across B2B sectors, management consulting, IT services, venture capital, private equity, architecture, and engineering firms. There's somebody who runs marketing, a big engineering company, and other B2B training and development.
Okay.
It was a place for people to find their tribe.
It's funny when things happen like that. I mean, usually events or meetings are so well orchestrated. It reminds me of a story back in the day. I was presenting to a client, big presentation, 20 people in the room. And we're 10 minutes into this hour-long presentation and the fire alarm goes off. And this was up in Minnesota in the middle of winter. And we all had to go outside and stand in the cold and we just continued the conversation. And it was very funny how it's something like that that's so disruptive makes for a very your senses are just at a different level and you just have more meaningful conversations. So it's funny. What tell me more about the conference. What was the goal of this? Is it mostly networking? I assume sharing. The irony of sharing thought leadership at a thought leadership conference is kind of another topic, but tell me more about the conference.
The conference has been in motion since 2016. We and a partner company called Rattleback have put on this show for people in thought leadership. And in 2020, when the pandemic, set in, it had to be a virtual only event. And we skipped 21 because we wanted to do an in-person event and didn't feel we could get enough people at that time. So we rolled the dice and for 22 and did a virtual and in-person event. And we did it not in Boston. We did it out in a different part of the world. We wanted to test that. And so we did it in Dana Point, California, which is in the southern part of Orange County. And it's a conference like all marketing, all B2B, all thought leadership marketing that is there to help our clients get better and hear from some other really good practitioners of thought leadership So we let clients in for free every year, but it's also a good way. So it's a client kind of give back on one hand, but it's also obviously a good way to meet new companies. And they include both companies that provide speakers, people who are quote unquote practitioners of thought leadership, as opposed to thought leaders themselves, famous people known for some expertise.
Yeah.
And
Who's good?
it is a marketing event, but it's also a client, hey, we love you kind of event.
Yeah. Who's the most interesting speaker you've seen over the years there?
Oh boy, that's a great question. Most interesting speaker. One of our best speakers has been a gentleman named Bill Shander, and he is an expert in data visualization, especially for B2B companies and especially for thought leadership within B2B companies. Bill is an educator. He teaches courses on LinkedIn, and he's just very good on stage in explaining what is a very complex topic and how ordinary people like us who do not think visually at all, or much less, visualizing data, about how to make people like us more literate around this topic. He's just a very engaging presenter.
Yep.
Bill is super, but there are others. There are others. We've had speakers from McKinsey have talked about their publishing operations. Fascinating to see this publishing machine, thought leadership publishing machine. We've had speakers from Harvard Business Review who explain why they approve and reject articles, enlightening. We had somebody from, in November, her name was Mia Lobel. She worked at Pushkin Industries, which is Malcolm Gladwell's podcasting company.
Okay. Yep.
Which produces Michael Lewis's podcast, among others, and of course, Malcolm Gladwell's podcast. And she spoke about the keys to doing great business podcasts. So
yep.
She was riveting.
It's got to be interesting because you've been doing thought leadership for a long time, and I would assume when you got started, it essentially was like you're going to write a book, or you're gonna write a piece that gets published in maybe a trade publication or a magazine. I mean, talk about the difference today as it relates to just content distribution.
So when I started in thought leadership back in 1987, in a consulting firm, a management consulting firm, my boss had several channels. One was an internal publication that we sent out to our clients and to prospects. So that was, this is pre-web, right? So you had to print stuff and send it in the mail. And Harvard Business Review was a big target for us as well, as it was for many other management consulting firms back then. And to this day, it's been a target for McKinsey, even though McKinsey has a Harvard Business Review quality publication of its own. Bain, BCG, et cetera. They all want to be in Harvard Business Review because it's by far, in my mind, and HBR will tell you this, it is the most prestigious management journal in the world. It really is. If you look at its circulation compared to the number 2 management journal published by a university, the number 2 publication, which is also very good in terms of circulation, is far behind.
Yep.
So HBR is the premier. And again, that's not to denigrate this number 2 or number 3 or number 4 publications. There's some great management journals in more specialized areas, but HBR is critical. The third piece of the marketing mix that my company, that I worked for at that time, used was somewhat innovative at the time for consulting firms. And that was public speaking and running our own conferences. So when that company, CSC Index circa 1995, was about a $200 million company, 30 million of that 200 million was a research and advisory business, kind of like corporate executive board was, subscription-based annual research, but also it had a marketing events business. So that company I worked for, a lot of that $30 million in revenue came from clients who wanted to play golf at Pebble Beach and other resorts around the country and listen to great speakers listen to
Yep.
great speakers. And so it was a company, it was a management consulting firm that had a that had a thought leadership research function that was world class at the time on the topics that we were focused on,
Yeah.
and it was certainly a world class event marketing
Yeah.
business.
It's fascinating. Management consulting companies and thought leadership are such a good fit. Someone recently asked me, tell me about a brand that you really liked. And I had two different answers. One of my answers was McKinsey when it related to thought leadership. And I said, the business justification for their thought leadership machine over the years, it's very simple. It's justify the highest rates in the industry, right? Like that is why they're doing thought leadership, is it helps them articulate who they are, it positions them. But to me, it all gets down to, are you going to pay McKinsey the ridiculous fee that comes with their reputation? It would be hard for them to charge those high fees if they didn't have some supporting marketing asset. And that I've known people who've worked for that publication over the years, and it is so good. They're really good at creating content, and it is in its own category. It doesn't even seem to be like a brand, like it's kind of like it's on the side next to their own corporate brand. All right, but I digress. I'm taking us off topic now. So I'm gonna bring us back, and we're gonna jump into story number 2. And this story has to do with you helping a client put a book together. So tell us about that journey with that client.
Right. So the year's 2015, and one of our freelance writers comes to me and says, Bob, I have a client. They want to write a business book. I don't do business books. I do articles. Bob, are you and your company, that my company at the time was a Bloom Group, are you interested? I said, who's the company? He told me the company's name. And I said, sure, introduce me to them. And so what I learned was, and this company is a mid-sized management consulting firm, global. They had been working on a book internally, and they didn't get very far. They had an internal writer who had apparently met a bunch of internal obstacles. And, writing a book is a good business book is extremely difficult. Writing a great business article, an HBR article, is extremely difficult. Writing a book is that times whatever, 10. So I talked with this firm and read what they had produced, and I said, what's your goal? And they said, our goal is to be seen as the leading expert on this topic around the world. And they had, and still do have, a lot of competition from much bigger management consulting firms. And I said, well, if you want this book to, you're going to need to find a book agent, and that book agent is going to need to find a publisher. And to get a book agent, you're going to need a book proposal. And so they hadn't considered a book proposal before. And we produced a book proposal, which got them an agent, which got them a publisher, and they came to market with the book in 2016. Another thing that they didn't realize was in the development of the content for the book, the manuscript, that they shouldn't use what I call the prose generation process of producing thought leadership, which is, stated simply, 2 or 3 people say, oh, here's our idea for chapter 1. You spend an hour or 2 with them, and they say, when can you give us a draft of the chapter? A week later, they look at the draft, they dump all over it, and they say, this is not really what we want to say. Well, it is what they said, but it's really not what they want to say, because they see, gaps in their thinking and statements that are highly arguable, and so gaps in the logic, etc. So I said to them, every good piece of thought leadership content starts with an outline, at least the type that we produce, starts with an outline. And sometimes, the outlines are there to iron out the logic, to understand the narrative structure of the argument, to create your argument, okay? And until you've created your argument through a structured outline, not one word of prose should be written. Because if you skip this structured outline stage, go right to prose, there's a good chance you will be 2 months later on version 15, and with all parties not liking this. And so the problem with using prose to develop an argument is it's a very inefficient process. So I had to learn the hard way early in my career not to use prose to help people think better, to capture their ideas in an outline and use the outline and go back and forth on an outline to
Yep.
nail the argument before a word of prose, i.e. manuscript, book manuscript copy in this case, is written. And so that book, using that process, we ghost wrote that book for them in about 5 months with 5 ghostwriters working on 10 chapters, but starting with building the outlines. And I can assure you that book, had we gone straight to prose for each of those X number of chapters, that book would not have taken 5 months. Or if it did, it would not have been a very good book.
Yeah, I'm going to follow up on one part. It's the first I've heard of 5 ghostwriters contributing to a book. Tell me about, how do you manage those ghostwriters? Because you have to have some commonalities to, like, whether it's storytelling or structure. How do you manage 5 ghostwriters on the same project?
Well, we filled the role of we're helping the client develop the argument through the outline process. Ghostwriters are often sitting in on those meetings, so he or she can hear, firsthand how the argument's developing. We will have secondary research done to fill in, to find stats where we need stats, stories sometimes where we need stories, and we'll interview our clients' clients to get more stories, or other companies that may not be their clients. But before our ghostwriters write the prose, they have a very detailed outline in front of them. And so it's not paint by numbers, but it's close. The outlines, it's up to the writers to turn the prose into enjoyable prose, and that's more of a writing skill, I would argue, than an argument development skill. And our best writers can do both, but it's rare to find a business writer who can work with a set of, or even just one, expert on a topic, who often has a big ego. It's rare to find a writer who can work productively with an expert to push his or her thinking and to put it in an outline and not insult the intelligence or bruise the ego. And then write powerful prose against an outline that writer has helped construct. It's those two skills. Those two skills are typically not found in the same person in our experience.
Yep, that makes sense. So keep on telling the story of this client. So take us to after the book is published. What happens? What's the business impact?
So the business impact. So this firm already had an extensive event marketing program in place in Europe, North America, Asia Pac, where it has offices. And so the authors of the book became, one more set of speakers to put on in their marketing events. And after the book was published, we said it's time to pitch Harvard Business Review to see if they would, we can take some of the content in the book, write it, pitch it to HBR, and see if they'll run it. So in fact, HBR ran 2 articles in their online edition that were not cut and paste jobs from the book. They had to be written from scratch, but they were, of course, based on the case examples in the book and the logic of the book and all that, the key messages of the book. So that helped a lot. That helped propel interest in the book. With HBR, I forget how many online readers, the readership back then, 3 million viewers. That doesn't mean 3 million are reading this article or that article, but it's a much bigger audience, I can guarantee you, than this consulting firm had at the time going to its website, or much bigger audience than just about every management consulting has going to its website.
Tell me about, so now I'm intrigued by the HBR process here. What is it a phone call? Is it an email? Tell me about, as you learned that and as you shared it with your client, like, how does that all go down?
So we have helped clients publish more than 50 articles in Harvard Business Review over the years, and that's going back to my early career at the consulting firm I mentioned at the outset, which was a company known as CSE Index. It was known for business reengineering. So my first experience with landing Harvard Business Review articles was with CSE Index, and that goes back to 1988. You have to have a counterintuitive idea. It has to be extremely well written. They have a couple dozen editors there who often rewrite articles that they get where they see there's a lot of merit in working, helping the author develop. The companies that I have worked with typically have never been authors in Harvard Business Review, and so they don't have the street cred that an HBS professor or a University of Chicago professor or Northwestern professor or Stanford or whatever professor, MIT professor, business Sloan School of Management professor has. And so we have to send HBR copy that doesn't need a lot of editing. It has to be extremely well written. I had a former HBR editor who had the thankless task one year being the person who, and this is when most submissions came on paper, who would take home had to write the rejection letters.
Yeah.
The 98% of the authors, and that is their rejection rate. 98% of rejection rate of unsolicited manuscripts. She said, and I'll never forget this, she said, many times I can't even figure out what idea these people are trying to explain. Okay, so
she should have used that for inspiration in the letter. We have no idea what you were trying to do.
Yeah, well, I guess she wanted to keep good written. HBR likes to keep good relations.
Sure.
And some of these are very impressive people who just can't write very well and who do have expertise. And sometimes it's counterintuitive. Sometimes there may be a big idea. In fact, her direct quote is, I'm now remembering it, and this is 10 years ago at least, says, sometimes there might be a big idea in there, but I can't puzzle it out. I can't understand what they're talking about.
Yeah.
So
it's interesting. I mean, you get so close to when you're writing something, you're so inside of it. And it really is fascinating how someone can spend a minute, 3 minutes reading a piece and just have that moment of clarity to be like, this isn't making sense. Or you can see the struggle the writer's having, right? There's 4 different things happening. They're kind of related, but not really. That's the biggest struggle when I've written something is you can't have like an out of body experience to be fair to the idea or the style of writing. So it's fascinating how someone else who has no context can just go in and say, well, here's what you're struggling with. Here's what needs to get tweaked or polished.
There are a couple ways to evaluate those kind of submissions or any article. The first way is something we say is to hold it against what we look at as 9 criteria of thought leadership content that would, for instance, pass with Harvard Business Review. And those things like novel solution. Do you have a very different solution to the problem at hand? Relevance is this a problem you're writing about that you're going to have to convince the target audience is a real problem, or will they pretty much accept this is a really serious issue for some companies? Clarity, rigor, evidence. That's often the key thing that's missing from articles, which is there may be a novel solution, but there's no evidence that the solution has actually worked anywhere. And so if you lack the evidence, you don't have, Harvard Business Review formula is you need to provide case examples, preferably not disguised, meaning you're mentioning the name of the companies and you're explaining what they did and the impact that it had. And the impact has to be pretty sizable. So, to me, the evidence is the most important of the 9 criteria. There's lots of interesting ideas, lots of interesting theory, but if it's not been proven to work, it's just nice theory. It's elegant. It might be elegant theory. So that's the first set of criteria. The second is, okay, let's say the elements are all there. Right? We have case examples and big results, and it's a relevant issue, and it's a very different solution than others have said. Okay, great, terrific. Has the article been written in a way that the average business executive can understand and follow the argument. And that's about the structure of the argument. So that's the work of saying, well, let's first start with the problem, the audience and the problem that they have in the world. And let's prove that, in fact, this is a problem. And let's talk about, this is the structure of the argument. Let's talk about why existing solutions have fallen short of solving it. What's your new and better solution? And demonstrate that it's worked at a number of companies and talk about the benefits. And what are the barriers to adopting your new and better solution, and how do you overcome them? And then the final part of this, what are you saying companies should do to move now if they are bought in by that point? Yeah, this is a new and better solution. How do I begin to do things like, how do I get other people on the management team whose buy-in I have to get to move in this direction? And that's a standard argument structure that we use in everything from blog posts to books. And, that second set of things is you have to be able to explain things. If you have all the goods, you have to explain things in a way that the audience can grasp. And many articles, skip over the problem, probably assuming everybody knows what it is, go right to the solution. And then skimp on the, well, here's how you do it, and here are the barriers you'll face, with the authors believing, we don't want to reveal too much. The more we reveal about how to solve this problem, they're not going to call us. Well, that doesn't work, thought leadership.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it's when you talked about the importance of the craft of communicating the idea, it reminds me of, would Simon Sinek be where he is today without the golden circle visual that was featured in I think it was a local TED Talk that turned into God knows how many millions of views, but it's that ability to grasp it. You don't even have to hear him talk, but when you read it, it just distills it and things click. And I think there is something to be said for that ability to do that in words or visuals. It's so powerful, because that's, when I first saw his talk, you see it and you're like, that just makes sense. And the visual representation of his thinking adds to that
framework.
clarity.
Frameworks are crucial. Jim Collins, the hedgehog concept, the three circles that overlap at some small point. And he has used that to explain corporate strategy and also personal development, what careers people should be in, do something you're passionate about, do something that you're really good at, and where there's market need. And that's a simplifying framework. We had one in our re-engineering days, the business system diamond. Michael Porter has had frameworks that have,
Porter was five forces, right? If I remember back.
And value chain and the value chain.
All right. So now, thanks for sharing both of the stories. We're gonna get to know more about you. Tell us about your first job in the B2B space.
So you could say my first job in B2B was working at a newspaper as a business reporter in Orange County, California, the Orange County Register. So I had been a sports writer before that for a year at a smaller paper out in Orange County. And at that point, I was a good sports writer. I was not great. And good sports writers were a dime a dozen. Lots of journalists want to write about sports. So bad sports writers are about a dime a dozen too, but good sports writers, a lot, And I thought two things. I had my first child on the way, and I thought, well, I'm good. I'm not a great sports writer. I'm going to be on the road if I get really good, because you're going to be covering a professional team, and I don't want to be on the road. I don't want to be seeing my kid half the year. I applied for a business writing job at the Orange County Register in 1980. And actually, I had first applied for a sports writing job at the Orange County Register in early 1980, and they said, we don't have any. Well, we do have an opening in the business section, which was a small business section that ran mostly stock tables and press releases, which a lot of big city newspapers, believe it or not, that was the state of business sections back then. They were not like the Wall Street Journal back then. They were not like the New York Times business sections back then. They were like PR outlets for
Yeah.
companies. And so they said, "Are you interested in this business writing opening?" I said, "Sure." So I took the job. They brought in a new business editor, a new editor. They became a very respectable business section. They hired a couple people who went on to, one worked for the Wall Street Journal, New York Times. And so they became a very respectable business section. So, but I was there for 3 years, and then I got bored and I launched a healthcare industry publication out of my home. And I lasted 7 issues before I ran out of money. And I think I invested 15,000 in. And so another big healthcare trade publisher said, "We'd like you to come work for us, and we'd like to buy your publication." And they erased the $15,000 debt I incurred from that publication.
All right. Nice.
And I worked for them for a year. Great company, but it was a long commute from Irvine, California to West LA. It was 2.5 hours coming back. This is 1984,
Jeez.
85. 84 was the LA Olympics, so you can imagine what traffic was. I said,
Yep.
I can't deal with the commute. So I got a job working at an IT sector publication called Information Week, published by a company that's long gone, a company that sold for $1 billion back in the early 2000s, CMP Publications. I worked for them for 2 years. They transferred me to the New England office because they needed a reporter in New England, an editor and reporter, and I worked for them until 1987, and I jumped into the thought leadership world in 87, joining this management consulting firm, CSE Index. It was a $40 million or so management consulting firm focused on helping CIOs, chief information officers at big companies, manage their functions much better.
Yep. Yeah. What are you looking back over, or your different experiences? What do you, when you're having the most fun, what types of things are you doing?
What am I doing? I'm doing research, I guess. I'm helping clients. And I'm doing research. I'm having clients develop ideas that they want to be known for. And that research, the kind of research I enjoy the most is talking to people in companies that, one set of companies that have done things very well, and another set of companies that have not done things nearly as well, and trying to understand what are the differences between best and not so best practices. That's where I get my jollies. I get my jollies less from writing. So I get my jollies, I guess, more from research on topics that are important to me, especially ones that are important to me, and which new ground needs to be broken, and helping a group of people generate the dots and then connect the dots in terms of insights on that topic.
I can relate to the research being fun. When I wrote my book, What's Your Problem? I did a lot of research on different techniques. One of them was root cause analysis. And there was a lot of root cause analysis done on the Titanic. And what's fascinating is we all grow up knowing the story about, well, an iceberg sank the Titanic. And we all think that's what happened. But when you researched it, there was like 5, 6, 7 other contributing factors that you just don't really learn about, going down to the week leading up before the voyage. They had there was a shortage of coal, so they used wood to keep the engines going. But then it was like that burned hotter than it needed to, which could have loosened the hole, so that if it wasn't so, if the heat had not gone so high, maybe it could have withstood the impact of the iceberg. So that is fun research. When you find these things, you just kind of take your limited knowledge of something and it expands in a way that you don't know. And that's the excitement too for the reader, right? When you're able to present that research, they have a similar moment.
Yeah, it's great to feel like you're on the cutting edge of something, on a topic that you're passionate about, let's say, and to see practices that perhaps nobody's captured before, and to be able to understand what the commonalities are among those practices.
Yeah, I'll add one other layer to my Titanic story. There's this one person put together this theory about the coal and the wood being used. And he said, if you look at this picture on the day they boarded, the opposite side of when people were getting on it, you'll see black marks on the lower part of the hole. And the reason why that happened was because they didn't want to board the normal way, because they thought all these affluent guests were like, what kind of a ship am I getting on, right? So they had to, he's like, look at how it's docked. They were hiding all the burn marks. And it's just, and you kind of go, all right, well, he could be onto something here. Like, that is strange. Why would they dock not the normal way? But anyway, all right, I want to have you talk a little bit about your book. I've got it. You sent me a copy. Thank you for that. Tell me about one theme in your book that that you focused on. Tell me about what you're trying to document in the book.
The most important theme in the book, as I look back on it, is actually the shortest chapter. And this theme connects to the point of thought leadership is not just about marketing. Thought leadership in B2B services companies is also needs to be about service innovation and scaling up innovative services. And when people think about thought leadership, they immediately go to, thought leadership marketing. And that's one of the ways I think thought leadership differs from content marketing. So I don't think thought leadership equals thought leadership marketing. Certainly marketing is part of it, but scaling up the expertise that has been gained by doing primary research of the type that has led to big concepts over the last 40 years, business reengineering, disruptive innovation, Clay Christensen, the Challenger's Sale, Corporate Executive Board, big ideas that changed the way people in business thought about operating their businesses. That thought leadership research, primary research, obviously needs to feed the marketing funnel with Harvard Business Review submissions and presentations at marketing events and self-published white papers and all that stuff. But as important, it has to feed service delivery in these firms. And that, by the way, is the reason that firm I worked at many years ago went from 40 million to 200 million in 8 years and to zero 5 years later, because it did not spend as much money and as much time on scaling up the supply and quality of consulting services to quote unquote re-engineer companies. And I see this mistake made repeatedly, that you can help a company become a leading expert on whatever the topic is through a best-selling book and a Harvard Business Review article and this and that. But if you can't scale up your firm's ability to deliver that expertise beyond the authors, if the people you send out in the field that clients have said, we want to do this, when can we start? The people who are doing the work can't do it at a level of quality as the quote unquote thought leaders, the authors, let's say, then you'll wind up creating a market for your competition that can scale up expertise and scale it up very well and quickly, like the Accentures of the world and Deloitte's of the world, who invest millions of dollars in methodology development and in internal training and development, in addition to recruiting, to scale up high quality services.
Yep.
And so that was the most important chapter in my book, what I call the supply side of thought leadership, which is one of the reasons I say in the book that thought leadership research should not report to marketing, because the delivery part of a consulting firm or a law firm or accounting firm or whatever firm, the people who deliver the services, if thought leadership research reports into marketing, the perception is, unfortunately, this is more marketing fluff. This is more marketing content, right? The head of thought leadership research at Accenture, for instance, reports up to the top of the company. And that's a McKinsey Global Institute, reports up to the top of the company. And if you're going to use thought leadership to create new expertise or to renew existing expertise in a big B2B services firm, you have to be able to scale up those big ideas. And otherwise, you will wind up making promises to the market that you cannot fulfill.
All right, awesome. Bob, I've really enjoyed you sharing your thoughts today on the podcast. Tell people where they can find your book.
So they can find the book on Amazon.com or BarnesandNoble.com. They can also find out more information about the book if they want to learn more about it before they purchase it at BudayTLP.com. You'll see a section about the book.
All right, great. Thanks again, Bob, and have a wonderful day, everyone. Take care.
Thanks, Steve.
Thanks for tuning in to the Interesting B2B Marketers podcast. Be sure to subscribe wherever you heard this podcast so you never miss an episode. If you found value in today's episode, please help grow the podcast by sharing with others and leaving a review. We'll see you next time.